Hi, it's David here from Parts and Pumps. In this video I'm going to run through the servicing of a JDK series single head pump. Secoh manufacture 4 distinct levels of JDK pump, and this video will help you service the smaller of the range, model number JDK40 and JDK50. The first thing to check is the filter on top of the pump. You can use a flat-bladed or cross-bladed screwdriver to take out the top screw, lift off the lid, and the filter compartment is exposed. The filter should be generally fairly clean, except for perhaps some dust or a surprise spider. If there is any evidence of a dark, oily or sticky substance on the filter, it may suggest the presence of corrosive gases being sucked in by the pump from a water treatment plant. Here's an example of some of this on the filters of a different pump. If the smelly gases from within a water treatment plant get back to where the pump is situated, they can corrode the copper content of the pump, such as the coils. If you spot any of these residues on the filter, you're wise to investigate how these gases have managed to get back to your pump. The pipe leading from the pump compartment down into the tank should be properly sealed, either with a rubber gasket or perhaps some silicone or even expanded foam. Secoh recommend replacing the filter annually, but it's wise to at least wash the filter in hot soapy water once every 3 or 4 months, ensuring it's completely dry before reinstalling. Before we go any further, it's important to note that we are about to expose electrical cabling, which normally has full mains electricity. It's essential therefore to isolate the pump from the mains. To access the internal components of a JDK40 or JDK50 pump, flip the pump over onto its top and undo the 4 bolts which hold the top casing down onto the base. Because of the rubber gasket, it's possible that the 2 halves of the external casing will not easily separate. There are, however, some small additions to the moulding of the base, which will allow you to insert a flat-bladed screwdriver, and with a little gentle pressure you can crack the seal on that gasket, allowing you to lift off the upper casing and expose the internal components. Remove the gasket and put it to one side. We can now access the internal drive core in order to fully service this JDK pump. With a good quality cross-bladed, well-fitting screwdriver, undo the 4 bolts which retain the top lid of the drive core. It's important to use a good screwdriver to avoid taking the heads off, as that would make life very difficult. With the bolts removed, lift off the lid, exposing the electrical components. Keep these 4 bolts separately from those holding the valve box and diaphragms on, as they are a different length. Now we can see exposed all the internal components that create the air for your system. Sitting between 2 drive coils is the magnet shuttle. This shuttle is bolted through the centre of 2 rubber discs or diaphragms, and each of these diaphragms sits within a valve box. When powered up, the coils make the magnet shuttle move from this angle left and right 50 times a second. The pulses of air generated by the diaphragms are passed down through the valve boxes and through these 2 pipes into the base of the pump, and ultimately down into the place where you need the air. As these pumps are commonly left on 24/7 and 365 days a year, the diaphragms will eventually suffer from material fatigue and tear. Secoh recommend replacing the diaphragms annually. The reality is that few people follow this and merely wait for the diaphragms to tear before replacing. In a JDK40 or JDK50 pump, waiting until later can sometimes result in damage to the magnet, as the pump will continue to try and run even though the diaphragm is ripped. In any case, replacing the diaphragm is a simple job and only takes a few minutes. The first task is to pull off the small pipes from the valve box nozzles with your fingers or perhaps with the assistance of a flat-bladed screwdriver. Slip the retaining rings a little way off the end of the pipe, then ease the pipe off the nozzle. Again, making sure we don't take the heads of the screws off, remove the 4 screws holding the valve box and diaphragms to the casing. Pull the valve box off the diaphragm ring using a flat-bladed screwdriver to separate the 2 elements if necessary. The rubber diaphragm is now exposed. With a 7mm spanner, perhaps like this, undo the nut holding the diaphragm on the end of the magnet shuttle and pull off the diaphragm. With the other diaphragm still on the other end of the magnet, you can use that like a handle to help you extract the magnet from between the coils. This gives you the opportunity to inspect the magnet and make sure it isn't too badly damaged. What we've shown here then is the inside of a new pump. The inside of your pump might be a little bit more dirty than this if it's been in service for some time. And you can use a compressor to blow out any dust from the pump, and if you don't have a compressor, we find a dry paintbrush can often work just as well to clean the pump out before reassembly. Putting the new parts in is pretty much the reverse of what we've just done. When offering up the new diaphragm, notice the space on the casing needs to receive the diaphragm aperture shown here. Push the magnet with the first diaphragm attached back in between the coils, being careful not to catch your fingers as sometimes the magnets can suddenly snatch in. Attach the second diaphragm and tighten the nuts sufficiently to ensure the magnet is sitting completely within the vertical guides on the inside of the diaphragm. Offer the first valve box up, once more ensuring that the aperture is lined up, and put the screws in loosely for now. Do the same the other end, and then carefully tighten all the screws in a diagonal pattern. Reattach the pipes onto the valve box nozzles, and using both thumbnails or perhaps a flat-bladed screwdriver again, gently ease the retaining ring to the end of the pipe. Pop the lid back on the internal core, insert the 4 retaining screws and washers and tighten them up, again in the diagonal pattern. But they don't need to be tightened up too much, as it can sometimes lead to damaging the lid. We now need to replace the gasket, and this needs to be replaced a certain way around due to the way the mains lead enters the casing. Notice this corner is slightly different to the other corners, and it's this corner that goes downwards over where the mains lead is. Notice that the underside of the top casing has an arrow moulded into it. The arrow is repeated on the outside. These arrows point to the side of the pump which has the external nozzle that's fitted to your system. Gently slide the top casing down onto the gasket and base, flip the pump over, and insert the 4 bolts and washers that hold the 2 parts of the casing together. Push them in until they catch with the threaded parts of the upper casing and tighten each one, again in a diagonal pattern. As the top and bottom casing are plastic, be careful not to over-tighten them. Put the pump back on its feet and test it before connecting to your system. Re-enter the pump back into your system and you're good to go.